Well, it is a historic day for the United States, for Israel, for the United Arab Emirates, for the Middle East as a whole, because Israel just cut a deal with the UAE brokered by the Trump administration, full normalization of relations. And it doesn't sound like they're going to be the last nation to do it. It sounds like we may hear from Bahrain and Oman, maybe even Saudi Arabia by the end of the next few months. It is a major step forward for the Middle East, brokered by the man I'm about to talk to, Avi Berkowitz, assistant to the president's special representative for international negotiations. Avi, congratulations on what is an actual world historical event. Pretty amazing stuff.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your show. You always cover things in a really fair way, and so I appreciate you taking the time. But I'd also like to recognize the president, who was the main negotiator here, as well as Jared Kushner, who really just led this effort, and I was happy to play my role. But thank you, though. Thank you for the kind words.
So, Avi, let's talk about the content of the deal for folks who don't understand what exactly happened here. What is the deal, and why is it so important?
So the deal is the full diplomatic normalization of relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. This is the first agreement since the Jordan-Israel agreement in '94. And honestly, I think it's, the first of many. And Jared alluded to this yesterday. We've had numerous conversations with other Arab and Muslim states in the Middle East and Africa. And we see potential for diplomatic relations between Israel and just a lot of other countries in the region. And so we think of this as an icebreaker, but in itself, honestly, and without sort of getting too far ahead into the future, it in itself is going to just completely transform the region. This is the first Gulf Arab nation to recognize the state of Israel. And they're a wealthy, affluent, smart, confident, extremely forward-leaning country. They have, technological advances in corona and, vaccines, things of that variety, as well as AI. And obviously Israel is sort of, Jared refers to it as the Silicon Valley of the Middle East. And so that combination is, it's going to lead to some historic change.
So, Avi, I was amused to see Joe Biden try to take credit for the deal. I thought the funniest thing that I had seen maybe in 6 months. Joe Biden put out a statement claiming that the Obama administration was somehow a contributing factor to this, claiming that the Arab Peace Initiative, first drawn up in 2002 and then pushed in 2007, which would have required Israel to abandon Judea and Samaria, abandon the Golan Heights, and abandon East Jerusalem, that was somehow the basis of an Israel-UAE deal, which did not after Israel has annexed the Golan Heights, has continued to settle Judea and Samaria and has not given up any claims there and has not given up any claims in East Jerusalem. Apparently, it was the brilliance of Biden that made all of this happen. Maybe you could speak to the innate stupidity of this particular line.
Well, if I could borrow a Ben Shapiroism, isn't it? Facts don't care about your feelings. Is that something that this is obviously President Trump's accomplishment. President Trump, took over after President Obama, a Middle East that honestly distrusted the United States, and it's almost like sort of, throughout the entire region, it was hard to really, outside of Iran, find anybody who actually sort of felt comfortable with the United States once the president took over. And, and Israel, not just, the Arab states, the Gulf states, but even Israel itself was facing a sort of a really tough relationship towards the end of that tenure. And President Trump completely turned the relationship around after the Jerusalem announcement, the Golan Heights, the Vision for Peace, and, taking ourselves out of UNRWA, funding, nonsense. After all of those historic moves, the people of Israel gained complete confidence that President Trump would not put their security in jeopardy in any way with any sort of peace proposal. And similarly, the Gulf Arab states saw us moving further away from Iran by leaving the JCPOA, and obviously the strikes and things that have happened, Soleimani and other things. So, the president has just completely changed the region. And, Ambassador O'Brien actually at the press conference yesterday said that he thinks the president deserves a Nobel Prize for this. And it was, sort of like the Twitter of the world sort of immediately came out and sort of slammed him for it. But I don't know. The president brokered peace, and I'm told that presidents get peace prizes for things, and sometimes for less. So,
Yeah, no, it's true. I said on the show earlier today that presidents have won peace prizes literally for being alive. That's what happened with President Obama, whose great achievement in winning the Nobel Peace Prize was being President Obama, which is pretty amazing. He's the only person to have ever done it. So I mean, that's I guess worthy of achievement. Let's talk for a second about the fact that Jared Kushner, your boss, has been raked over the coals. Supposedly, he didn't know what he was doing in the Middle East. He's blundering about in the Middle East. He just has no idea. But it's Jared Kushner and the Kushner team that get this done in the Middle East. It is America's strong and solid support for the state of Israel that gets this done. There are a bunch of myths that just got exploded by this peace deal, and I've been going through them at length. I mean, the conventional wisdom said that recognizing Israel's presence in Jerusalem would lead to all-out nuclear war. It led to nothing. The conventional wisdom was that if Israel claimed sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which it requires for its own security, that this would lead to Middle Eastern war. It led to nothing. The idea was that if Israel did not make territorial concessions to a terroristic Palestinian authority, then that would lead to all-out war in the Middle East. It instead led to not only nothing, but a peace deal between Israel and the UAE. Maybe you can talk about some of the idiocies of conventional wisdom on this stuff.
Yeah, Jared, I don't exactly know what it is, but for some reason, I think prior to yesterday, there was some sort of like just unique, I don't know, there's just the left for some reason really likes to go after him. And I honestly think it's sort of a testament to the fact that he's successful and he's actually withstood so much absurd criticism that, they're trying to sort of, make him to, remove him or whatever it might be to try to really marginalize him. But, success is sort of the best sort of medicine. And ultimately with not only this, but, the criminal justice reform that the president is running on and the USMCA agreement, Jared has a really long list of accomplishments now that, and I'm a little bit biased. I think yesterday's was his biggest, if I may sort of plug that. And I'm hopeful that there's more accomplishments to come. But I don't really understand where sort of all the outrage comes towards him. And I deal with the media a lot as it relates to Jared. I'm sort of like the unofficial spokesperson for him to sort of deny like nonsense as it comes at him. And each time I'm like, where is there a room somewhere where people are making this up? I don't fully, is it like coordinated? Like, I don't always understand where it comes from and what its motivation is. But I think today and yesterday really put a lot of that to bed, and I'm really happy for him because he deserves it.
We're speaking with Avi Berkowitz, special assistant to the president, and a man who is largely responsible for negotiating the amazing historic breakthrough deal between Israel and the UAE. So, Avi, I don't know if you had a chance to read Thomas Friedman's column about the deal today, in which he acknowledged that peace for peace is actually a better deal than land for peace. But he has a theory of what went on. And it seems to me that his theory is just pulled directly from his colon, that it doesn't actually reflect any sort of reality. The basic idea here being that basically the UAE somehow pressured Prime Minister Netanyahu into the deal by rejecting the Trump peace plan, thus reenacting all of the fundamental foreign policy bona fides of the Biden administration. So basically, the idea from Thomas Friedman is that the UAE got a concession from Israel, and Israel basically allowed the concession in order to avoid the domestic blowback from not annexing Judea and Samaria. Is there any reality to the narrative that Thomas Friedman is putting forth here, or is he, as usual, just making things up?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing that I think is probably the most helpful as a way to understand what happened yesterday is to read the joint statement that we put out. It specifically points, and that was actually an important component to us and David Friedman and Jared when we were, working the joint statement, which all three countries obviously had to approve before it went out, where it specifically thanks the UAE. They were one of three countries that actually came on January 28th to the rollout of the Vision for Peace. And it specifically actually points to elements of the Vision for Peace that are to be enacted as a direct result of this agreement, right? So now, worshipers from all over the world are going to be able to come to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and pray from a direct flight from Abu Dhabi to Tel Aviv or Dubai to Tel Aviv as we sort of work out those details. And honestly, that was important to us because we wanted to really sort of clarify that it's actually possibly as a direct result of the president putting out a very detailed proposal that's on the table. The Palestinians, should they be willing, it's sort of there. If they ever decide to sort of come to the negotiating table, there's a serious, detailed, important proposal that's ready for them. And I hope that they'll take it seriously and come negotiate. But if not, that veto, and I think you actually, alluded to this on Twitter today, that veto is gone. And I think that might be one of the biggest takeaways from yesterday is the Arab and Muslim world is not going to allow a decades-old conflict to hold back progress for their people. And the UAE proved that yesterday, but I think other countries are seeing, the reaction to yesterday and are going to probably, try to go forward in the same way. And so, the vision for peace is there. We hope that the Palestinians will come back and review it and negotiate. But if not, the Arab and Muslim world is moving forward.
So one of the legacies here, as I said, Joe Biden tried to claim credit for all of this, which is hilarious. It's like Strom Thurmond trying to claim credit for the Civil Rights Act. But Joe Biden tried to claim credit for this. The reality is that in a sort of peculiar way, Obama and Biden were responsible for this coalition coming together. It is only their support for the garbage Iran nuclear deal and their implicit support for monetary support for Iranian terrorism. And they didn't rule out Iranian terror support as a condition of money flowing into Iran that led to a lot of this. It turns out that a lot of the countries in the Gulf are more concerned about the rise of Iran than they are about the concerns of the Palestinians. It turns out that they are also concerned about the fact that the Palestinians have been receiving overt material support from the government of Iran for quite a while. So it seems like a lot of what has happened is, in fact, a direct reaction to the Obama policy, but not in the way that they thought it would be.
Yeah, it's a great point. And when I actually took over in this role that I'm in now as the special representative, part of my sort of team, we when we put out the statement or whatever, it was that Brian Hook, the special envoy for Iran, was actually going to sort of come onto the team and be a part of the negotiating team. And I think there was some sort of like scratching of heads throughout the sort of diplomatic corps of the world, wondering, why Brian Hook? What's like Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Iran? And it's sort of proven, prescient in that here we have a guy who anytime we would go travel throughout the Gulf or really anywhere in the Middle East, you couldn't have a conversation that Iran didn't come up in some way and, some sort of issue that they were causing. And I think what yesterday, it's been a long 24 hours, but yesterday what it really sort of showed is that there's really a realignment and there's sort of the Iran way of life, which is, proxy wars and militias and honestly state funding of terrorism. And then, there's the normalization route, there's progress, there's, direct flights, tourism, freedom of religion, things that matter, really are good things on their face. And we are excited because we really see that there are a lot of countries that appreciate what happened yesterday and want to be a part of it going forward.
Well, it really is an incredible achievement. Avi Berkowitz, Assistant to the President's Special Representative for International Negotiations. Congratulations on what is a historic achievement. Avi, appreciate the time.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me on.